broad brush here of what you may or may not have. So the bottom line on insurance, farm liability, which is very common, does not help you in a pollution loss. We all know this. I mean, that's common knowledge. Don't expect your farm liability and your umbrella to kick in, because it's not going to. An endorsement can be added. They vary. They're very affordable and will cover certain losses. And I didn't click my slides, so you're probably wondering what the heck this guy's saying. A separate policy can be pricey, very pricey, but they're much broader. What I have on there, an example, ARMR policy, so American Risk Management Resources. They're a company out of Madison. A lot of independent agents go to them. Farm liability is really reasonable. It might be, say $200 a farm, usually less than that actually. So the thought is, well, look at all the exposure I have on my farm that I'm paying this $150, $200 of liability for. And here you add a pollution policy, and it's going to cost you thousands of dollars. The reason being is there isn't enough people in the pool yet to spread out that risk. There's farmers buying them, but not near as many as people that are buying liability underneath the farmer's policy. So as more and more people add to that pool, I think we'll see the costs go down. I also think, the handling of manure, we're getting better at it. Spraying our crops, we're getting better at it. When and why and how. So those are all affecting it. But right now the costs can be quite high. With those separate policies, like the one I mentioned from ARMR, believe it or not, it'll pay a fine. That's the only one I know that does that. So you receive a fine from DNR, they'll pay it. Kind of strange to the insurance world. Bodily injury, if you hurt someone, if you damage someone's property, the cleanup costs associated with it. Odor. Odor is a real common one now. Is it covered or isn't it covered? This policy from ARMR will cover it. They'll cover the defense cost, and if there's a judgment against you, they'll pay that as well. We have another carrier that writes a separate pollution policy. What triggers a claim from them if it's abrupt, unexpected, or unintended. So if it meets one of those three items, they'll pay the claim, but they will not cover odor losses. The way they look at odor is their concern, and granted I think there's two reasons here. One, it minimizes their risk. And two, if there's a law firm out there that says, we know this carrier covers odor defense. So if we go after this farm, they're going to rack up legal fees. We're going to rack up a big bill on our end too for people to pay us. So they can target those farms, and they know they have a lot of work sitting ahead of them with a lot of money from each side to keep it flowing, rather than one side saying, okay, I'm just going to throw in the towel type of thing. So what they do is they do not cover odor unless there's a judgment against you. They will then pay for that judgment, but they will not pay your defense cost. You're out all that. So it's a cheaper policy. It has some perks to it. Excuse me. But it also has its limitations as too. So maybe it's somewhere in between an endorsement on a farm owner's policy and what I would consider a pretty Cadillac plan from ARMR. The last thing I got here is some examples of claims. These are all within our agency. There's another one on there that they don't have listed, which I'll touch on. Believe it or not, when I scared you and said those cheap ones on your farm owner's policy have gaps, every one of these was paid by a farm owner's policy because they had that endorsement for pollution. The first one actually was in Fond du Lac County. There was a sensor in a tank. It was the manure being supplied to a sand separation, some equipment. The sensor, I forget if it tipped sideways or just was failing, but a pump was sending manure into the tank. The sensor didn't tell it to shut off the pump. It kept pumping, it was taken in faster and the sand separator could handle it. Well, it flowed out of the tank, out of the building, into the field ditch, then into the road ditches. When it was all said and done, there was no one injured. But there was about $52,000 of cleanup. It involved excavators, vacuum tanks. The firemen were involved. In this case, the farmer would take the hose into the culverts and blast them all out to get them clean. And it was a cold, cold day, but that's what it took to get everything cleaned up in that scenario. Number two, here's the case where a farmer hires a contractor. So, hired a contractor, this contractor got stuck out in the field, so what do? He just dumped his load. All his liquid manure in one spot. Well, it ran downhill into a field ditch, across the road, into a neighbor's pond. That neighbor was hosting his daughter's wedding in the near future, so he was obviously very upset. What they had to do in this scenario is pump out his pond, fill it back up, pump it out again. Needless to say, he was happy when it was all said and done and his grass was greener than it ever was. So it turned out they did get it fixed before the wedding, but it ended up being about a $22,000 bill. The next one, this was relatively recent in Calumet County, where a hose broke. Pretty minor when you looked at it. It didn't seem like it was hardly anything like, yeah, do we really need to file a claim type of thing from the farmer? The bills started to add up. There was no excavating in this case. It was simply just vacuum trucks taking water, hosing down the weeds in the ditch, to flushing the manure off, and then sucking it back up. The last one, this is the classic case where you have a truck going down the road, you take a corner too fast, it spills out. This one could have got ugly. It wasn't too bad, about $18,000. Give credit to the farmer and DNR for reacting quickly on this one. The manure is headed to a creek, but they took straw bales, which they had, quick access to, put them down, it helped absorb some of the manure and prevent it from traveling. They're able to get it vacuumed up and cleaned up without a whole lot of issue. Another one the agency's in the middle of, this is really unique. This was actually involving, I think this was in Wapaka County. It might even have been Outagamie County, but nonetheless, a farmer sprayed their crops. Sprayed his crops, it was a calm day, no issues, no overspray onto the neighboring field until about 12 hours later. It's sandy country where this was, and the spray that settled down onto the plant and onto the field, onto the dirt, the wind picked up, grabbed the sand, and threw it to the neighboring field where they're growing some food grade. In this case, I think it was cabbage. Since it was food grade, they could not accept it. It wasn't a saleable crop. So that one's, the reserve on that one, nothing's been paid out. They're trying to determine if our insured was liable. He did everything right from the start. Should he have been aware of the winds picking up 10 hours later? When you involve a group of attorneys and judges, it's hard to say what they might consider. But that one's out at about $750,000 right now. The insured has enough coverage for that, so it'll be no out expense of their pocket. But nonetheless, that's a more severe loss. In here, we're just talking damage to a crop. None of these scenarios involve anyone getting sick or injured. We haven't had that. Will we someday? Maybe. Would I expect the numbers to be a lot higher if that's the case? Absolutely. Especially when it comes to legal fees and also liability payments out for bodily injury. So.
Question.
Yep.
Did these guys have the additional pollution insurance, or did you just pay that out of their liability? And what separates it from being, you've got a tanker, I don't know if that tanker rolled or if it just spilled out, but, I would think manure getting into the guy's pond would be considered a pollution issue, but what separates whether it's pollution or just a liability claim that you covered it?
Sure, so all these scenarios involved a farm that had a separate endorsement on their farm owner policy to treat these as pollution type of events.
Then I don't have a question.
Yeah, so that's how they were all covered by insurance. Without that endorsement, I don't see any one of these being covered by insurance. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
So then what actually does an umbrella policy cover?
An umbrella policy? So what your umbrella is for is you have a farm owner's policy or a homeowner's policy. You have your auto insurance. You might have some toys, a boat, wrecked vehicles, ATVs, snowmobiles, four-wheelers, UTVs. So what an umbrella policy is for is, say you're in an auto accident And your insurance policy, your auto insurance policy is primary, so that picks up first. Your auto policy has $500,000 of coverage. Say that it's a severe enough accident, these don't happen every day, but it's a severe enough accident where they're not suing you for $500,000, they're suing you for $1.2 million. We all see the commercials on TV, you know, I got X number of dollars. So it's that guy, he's the one who's suing you for $1.2 million. Maybe rightfully so. If your auto policy has $500,000 of coverage, it'll pay out the $500,000. That other $700,000 is on your own dollar, unless you have an umbrella policy. It'll kick in for the additional $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, whatever the limit might be. In the scenario I gave you, the auto policy would pay out $500,000, the umbrella would pay out $700,000. That guy would be up to $1.2 million, so there wouldn't be any out-of-pocket expense in your end. Umbrellas do not go over pollution because pollution is excluded underneath your general liability. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
What, and maybe it's not a fair question, but the additional pollution insurance that you're talking about, you know, not the Cadillac plan in Madison, but these, how do you base that? Is that, I mean, is it quite an expensive policy to get that additional coverage? And then do you look at the size of the operation, the number of cows, or what type of different parameters do you use to or is it a percentage of what the overall policy is, or what do you guys do to determine what that should be?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of it, what it's based on is acres and cattle number. You factor those into there. What some carriers will do is say, are you a CAFO? And you'll go into one category, or they might say, how many cows you have, and it's truly based off the number of cows rather than saying all CAFOs are the same and all non-CAFOs are the same. The other big one is acres, like you mentioned. If you're, usually it's done in a range. If you're between 0 and 500 acres, you're in one category, 500 to 1,000, 1,000 and beyond, you might fall into a separate one. ARMR, the one I mentioned, the one out of Madison, they do it truly by acres and by cows. The other one I mentioned that didn't pay for odor, what they do is if you're a CAFO, it's this rate. If you're not a CAFO, you're that rate. So the large CAFOs, the premium looks pretty good with that one. The smaller ones,